For 7 years, not a single soul in Copper Springs had asked Elijah Crane to sit at their table. Women crossed the street when they saw him coming. Men nodded once and looked away. Children stared until their mothers pulled them close and whispered warnings about strangers. He lived alone in a cabin 3 miles from town. He gentled wild horses that other cowboys feared to touch. And he never spoke more words than absolutely necessary. Because Elijah Crane was paying for something. A sin so heavy, he believed he deserved nothing but loneliness for the rest of his life. 7 years ago, he helped hang an innocent man. He watched the rope go around that man's neck. He watched the floor drop. And he felt satisfied, until 6 months later, when a dying man confessed to the real murder. Now Elijah lives with the ghost of a man who begged for his life while everyone laughed. Then one autumn evening, a woman with honey-colored eyes handed him a dropped glove and said 5 words that terrified him more than any wild horse ever had. "Would you like to come to dinner?" Value statement. This story proves that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It frees you from being its prisoner. And sometimes all it takes to save a broken soul is one person brave enough to set a place at the table. If you've ever felt unworthy of love because of something you can never undo, this story will reach into your chest and remind you that redemption is still possible. Drop a comment and tell me, has anyone ever seen the good in you when you couldn't see it yourself? Subscribe now and stay until the very end. Elijah's journey from exile to belonging will change how you see second chances forever. The town of Copper Springs had known Elijah Crane for 7 years. In all that time, not a single soul had asked him to sit at their table. He was the man who fixed fences when storms tore them down. He was the man who broke wild horses that other cowboys feared to touch. He was the man who rode into town once a month for supplies. He spoke only the words necessary to complete his transactions. Then he disappeared back into the dust from which he came. Nobody knew where he had come from. Nobody knew why his eyes carried such weight, like stones sinking in deep water. They only knew that Elijah Crane was not the kind of man you invited into your home. The women crossed to the other side of the street when they saw him coming. The men nodded once and looked away. Children stared with wide eyes until their mothers pulled them close and whispered warnings about strangers. Elijah had accepted this truth long ago, the way a man accepts the color of his own eyes, or the particular loneliness of his own shadow. Some men were meant for family suppers and Christmas gatherings. Some men were meant for the warmth of candlelit conversations and the laughter of children. Elijah was meant for cold campfires and the company of stars that never answered back. He lived in a cabin 3 miles outside of town. The cabin had belonged to a trapper who died of fever 10 years before Elijah arrived. Nobody wanted it. The roof leaked. The windows were cracked. The walls let in every winter wind that blew across the territory. But Elijah did not mind. He patched the roof with his own hands. He fixed the windows with glass he bought from the general store. He sealed the walls with mud and straw until they kept out most of the cold. The cabin was small and dark and lonely. But it was his, and loneliness was what he believed he deserved. Every morning he woke before dawn. He fed his horses. He checked his fences. He rode out to whatever ranch had hired him that week. The ranchers paid him well because he was the best horse gentler in the territory. Wild mustangs that had thrown every other cowboy would stand calm and still beneath his hands. Stallions that had bitten and kicked and screamed with fury would follow him like puppies within a week. People said he had magic in his fingers. People said he must have made a deal with the devil. People said all kinds of things about Elijah Crane, but they never said them to his face. And they never asked him what the truth really was. The truth was simpler than magic, and sadder than any deal with the devil. Elijah understood broken things. He understood fear. He understood what it felt like to be wild and wounded and desperate for someone to treat you with patience instead of force. He gentled horses the same way he wished someone would gentle him, with quiet words and steady hands and the promise that he would never cause them pain. But there was no one left to gentle Elijah Crane. He had made sure of that. On the evening, everything changed. Autumn had come to Copper Springs. The leaves on the cottonwood trees had turned to gold. The air carried the smell of wood smoke and dying grass. Elijah rode into town with his collar turned up against the chill. His bones ached with a cold that felt older than his 32 years. The general store was nearly empty when he entered. His boots were heavy on the wooden floor. His hat was pulled low against curious glances that never came any more. People had long stopped being curious about Elijah Crane. He was simply part of the landscape now, like a weathered barn or a crooked fence post. He moved through the aisles with the efficiency of long practice. Coffee, flour, salt, beans, ammunition for his rifle, a new coil of rope. He gathered everything he needed and carried it to the counter where old Mr. Patterson stood waiting. Mr. Patterson was 73 years old. He had run the general store for 40 years. He had seen cowboys and outlaws and settlers and soldiers pass through his doors. He treated them all the same, with polite indifference and fair prices. "That will be $4.60, Mr. Patterson said. Elijah counted out the coins and placed them on the counter. He did not speak. He never did. Mr. Patterson swept the money into his cash drawer and turned away. Elijah gathered his supplies. He turned toward the door. And that was when he heard her voice. "You dropped this, mister." Elijah turned slowly, the way a man does when he has forgotten what it feels like to be spoken to directly. She was standing there with her hand extended. She was holding a worn leather glove that must have slipped from his coat pocket. Her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight. Her hair was auburn, pinned loosely at her neck with strands escaping around her face. There was something in her expression that Elijah had not seen directed at him in years. Genuine kindness, without expectation, without fear. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. She smiled, and something cracked inside his chest, like ice breaking on a spring river, like a door opening in a house that had been locked for too long. "I am Clara," she said. "Clara Whitmore. I took over the boarding house from old Mrs. Patterson last month. You must be the horse gentler everyone talks about." Everyone talks about. The words sat strange in his ears. He wondered what they said, that he was dangerous, that he was peculiar, that he was a man best avoided. "Elijah Crane," he offered. He took the glove from her hand. Their fingers brushed, and he felt the contact move through him like lightning seeking ground. "I know who you are," Clara said, and her smile did not falter. "I have been hoping to meet you. The way people describe your work with horses, it sounds almost like magic." "Just patience," he said. "Animals trust patience." "People should too," she replied. And there was something meaningful in the way she said it. Something that suggested she saw more than his weathered exterior and his silence. She was perhaps 28. Her hands showed evidence of hard work, calluses on her palms, a small burn scar near her wrist. There was strength in her stance, determination in her shoulders, but also a softness around her eyes that spoke of sorrow survived. "Mr. Crane," she said, and he felt the formality of his name like a small disappointment. "I make supper every evening at the boarding house. There is always more than enough. Would you like to come tonight? 6 o'clock? The invitation hung in the air between them, like something fragile, like something impossible. Nobody had ever asked Elijah Crane to dinner. Not in 7 years. Not since he had ridden away from everything he used to be. He should say no. He should tip his hat and walk away. He should return to the safety of his solitary cabin, where expectations could not wound him, where hope could not take root and then wither and die. But something in her honey-colored eyes held him in place, and before his better judgment could intervene, he heard himself say the words, "I would like that." Clara smiled again, that same smile that had cracked something open inside him. "Wonderful," she said. "I will see you at 6 then." The boarding house is the big white building on the corner of Main and Oak. You cannot miss it." She turned and walked away, her skirts swishing against the wooden floor, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light that streamed through the store windows. Elijah stood there for a long moment, holding his supplies, holding his recovered glove, holding on to a feeling he had not experienced in so many years that he had almost forgotten its name. Hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope. It could build you up and tear you down. It could make you believe in possibilities that would never come true. Elijah knew this better than anyone. He had learned it in the hardest way possible. But as he walked out of the general store and mounted his horse, he found that he could not make himself let go of it. Not yet. Not when a woman with honey-colored eyes had looked at him like he was worth knowing. He rode back to his cabin. He unsaddled his horse. He put away his supplies. And then he did something he had not done in 7 years. He prepared for dinner. The walk to Clara's boarding house that evening was the longest of Elijah's life. He had changed into his cleanest shirt, a blue cotton that still held the memory of better days. He had combed his dark hair until it lay flat against his head. He had trimmed his beard close to his jaw. He had polished his boots until they shone in the lamplight. Then he had looked at himself in the cracked mirror of his cabin, searching for whatever flaw had kept him outside the circles of human warmth for so many years. He saw only a man, tired perhaps, marked by seasons of solitude. Lines around his eyes that had not been there 7 years ago, a hardness in his jaw that came from clenching it against words he could never speak. But just a man nonetheless. Why had she invited him? What did she see when she looked at him? Everyone else saw a stranger to be avoided. A man wrapped in mystery and silence, a potential danger. But Clara Whitmore had looked at him with kindness. She had spoken to him like he was any other person, like he deserved to be spoken to. The thought terrified him more than any wild horse ever had. He almost turned back 3 times on the walk into town, once at the edge of his property, once at the bridge over Copper Creek, once at the corner of Main Street where the boarding house stood glowing with lamplight. Through the windows he could see shapes moving, people sitting at a long table, candles flickering. The warm golden light that spoke of home and family and all the things Elijah had denied himself. His feet stopped moving. Stopped. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct told him to turn around, to go back to his cabin, to stay safe in his solitude where nothing could hurt him. But then he remembered Clara's smile, the way her eyes had crinkled at the corners, the genuine warmth in her voice when she said she had been hoping to meet him. He forced himself forward, up the steps, across the porch. His knuckles found the courage to knock before his mind could talk him out of it. The door opened, and Clara stood there in a blue dress that matched the autumn sky at twilight. Her face brightened when she saw him, like a lamp being lit, like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "You came," she said, as if she had genuinely wondered whether he would. "Said I would," he replied. She stepped aside and gestured for him to enter, and Elijah Crane crossed the threshold into a world he had forgotten existed. The parlor was warm with the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Candles glowed on every surface. The walls were papered in a pattern of tiny flowers, blue and yellow and soft pink. There were others there, a young couple sitting close together on a settee. The man had his arm around the woman's shoulders. They looked up when Elijah entered, curiosity in their eyes, but no fear. An older gentleman sat in an armchair near the fire. He had spectacles perched on his nose and a book open in his lap. He nodded politely. A widow named Mrs. Henderson sat in a rocking chair by the window. She was knitting something in red yarn. She smiled at Elijah and said good evening in a voice as soft as butter. Elijah felt their gazes land upon him. He prepared himself for the usual discomfort, the subtle shifting away, the whispered questions, the way people found excuses to leave when he entered a room. But Clara introduced him simply. "This is Mr. Crane," she said, "the finest horse gentler in the territory." Her voice held a note of pride, as if she had found something valuable and wanted to show it off. The others smiled. The young man stood and extended his hand. "Thomas Wright," he said. "This is my wife, Sarah. We are traveling west to California." Elijah shook his hand. The grip was firm and friendly. No hesitation, no fear. "Please sit," Clara said. "Supper will be ready in just a few minutes." She led him to the dining room, a long table covered in white cloth, places set for 6, china plates with blue flowers, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight. Elijah had not seen a table like this in 7 years. He had eaten his meals alone at his cabin, standing at the counter, sitting on the porch, sometimes not bothering with a plate at all. He took the seat Clara indicated. At the head of the table, the place of honor. He wanted to protest, to say he did not deserve such a position, but the words stuck in his throat. The others joined them. Thomas and Sarah sat across from each other, exchanging glances full of love and shared secrets. The old gentleman introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Wells, a retired physician traveling to visit his daughter in Oregon. Mrs. Henderson took the seat beside Elijah. She patted his arm and told him she was glad he had come. Clara brought the food in on serving platters. Roasted chicken, potatoes swimming in butter, green beans from the last of the autumn garden, fresh bread still warm from the oven, a dish of apple preserves, a pitcher of cold milk. Elijah stared at the abundance. His mouth watered, his stomach clenched with a hunger that was more than physical. "Please help yourselves," Clara said. She took her seat at the other end of the table. Across from Elijah, their eyes met, and she smiled. They said grace. Dr. Wells offered the blessing. His voice was gentle and sincere. He thanked God for the food and the company and the kindness of their hostess. Then the platters began to move around the table. Elijah took a little of everything. His hands trembled slightly as he served himself. He hoped no one noticed. The first bite of chicken nearly undid him. He had not eaten food made by another person's hands in so long. The flavors burst on his tongue. The meat was tender. The seasoning was perfect. Every bite tasted like comfort, like care, like love. He had to pause, set down his fork, steady himself against the emotion that rose unexpected and unwelcome in his chest. His eyes burned, his throat tightened. He stared at his plate and willed himself not to fall apart. "Mr. Crane?" Clara's voice was soft with concern. "Is something wrong?" "No," he managed. His voice came out rough. "Broken. It has been a while since I have had a home-cooked meal is all. Forgot how good it could be." The table fell quiet. But it was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of recognition, of understanding that sometimes a simple kindness could touch places that had been left untended too long. Mrs. Henderson patted his arm again. "Well," she said, "you are welcome here any time." Clara sets the best table in the territory. The conversation resumed. Thomas talked about their plans for California. Sarah described the garden she hoped to plant when they arrived. Dr. Wells shared stories of his years as a physician. Mrs. Henderson talked about her late husband and the ranch they had built together. And Elijah listened. He did not speak much, but he listened. And for the first time in 7 years, he felt like he was part of something larger than his own lonely existence. After dinner, the others retired to their rooms. Elijah found himself in the kitchen with Clara. She washed the dishes. He dried. They worked in comfortable silence that felt like a conversation. The kitchen was warm. Steam rose from the basin of hot water. The smell of soap and clean dishes filled the air. Through the window, Elijah could see the stars beginning to appear, the same stars he talked to every night in his loneliness. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said finally. Her hands were still in the soapy water. "You can ask. Why do you live out there all alone? A man with your skills, your way with animals. You could work anywhere. You could have friends, a family." Elijah set down the plate he was drying. He looked at her. In the lamplight, Her face was open and earnest. She genuinely wanted to know. She was not asking to satisfy curiosity or confirm rumors. She was asking because she cared. "I did something," he said slowly. The words came from a place he had kept locked for years. "A long time ago. Before I came here. Something I could not undo. I thought staying away from people was the penance I deserved." Clara turned from the basin. She dried her hands on her apron. Her honey-colored eyes held his gaze. "What did you do?" The question hung in the air, heavy as stone. Elijah had not spoken of it in 7 years. Had not told a single soul. The secret lived inside him like a wound that would not heal. But something about Clara made him want to tell her. Something about the way she looked at him. Without judgment, without fear, with a kindness that asked for nothing in return. "It is a long story," he said. Clara smiled. "I have time." They sat at the small table in the corner of the kitchen. Clara poured 2 cups of coffee, strong and black, the way Elijah liked it. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup, drew strength from its heat. Then he began to speak. "I was a deputy," he said, "in a town called Red Mesa, down in Texas. I was 24 years old, thought I knew everything, thought I was doing good in the world." Clara listened. She did not interrupt. Her eyes stayed on his face, patient and steady. "There was a farmer named Samuel Burke," Elijah continued. "Had a spread about 5 miles outside of town. Good land, good water. His neighbor wanted that land. A man named Calloway. They had been fighting about the property line for years." He paused, took a sip of coffee. The memories were sharp. Even after 7 years, they cut like broken glass. One night, Samuel Burke was found dead, shot in the back, in his own barn. And all the evidence pointed to Calloway. "What evidence?" Clara asked quietly. Witnesses saw them arguing the day before. Calloway had threatened to kill him. Called him out in front of the whole town. Said he would see Burke dead before he gave up an inch of that land. Elijah shook his head. "We found Calloway's gun in the barn, same gun that killed Burke, and Calloway had no alibi. Said he was home alone that night, but his wife had left him months before. No one to vouch for him." Clara's brow furrowed. "It sounds like strong evidence." It was. That is what we all thought. The sheriff, the judge, the whole town. Everyone knew Calloway was guilty. Everyone wanted justice for Samuel Burke. Elijah's voice dropped. "And I was part of the posse that brought him in. I put the handcuffs on him myself. I looked him in the eye and told him he was under arrest for murder. What did he say? He said he was innocent." Elijah laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Of course he did. Every criminal says that." I did not believe him. None of us did. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Calloway was found guilty. And 2 weeks later, he hanged. Clara drew in a sharp breath. "I watched it happen," Elijah said. "I stood there in the crowd. I watched the rope go around his neck. I watched the floor drop. I watched him fall. And I felt nothing but satisfaction. Justice had been served. A murderer had paid for his crime." He set down his coffee cup. His hands were shaking. He had not told this story in 7 years, had not spoken these words to anyone. 6 months later, there was a fire at a saloon in the next county. A man died in that fire, but before he died, he confessed. "Confessed to what?" Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "To killing Samuel Burke. He was a drifter, a hired gun. Someone had paid him to do it. To kill Burke and frame Calloway for the murder." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no. The gun we found was planted. The arguments were coincidence. Calloway was innocent. He had been innocent all along. And we killed him." Elijah's voice broke. He stared at the table, unable to meet Clara's eyes. He had a wife. She had left him because of the fighting. But she still loved him. She came back for the trial, begged the jury for mercy. begged them to see that he was not a killer. He swallowed hard. And he had children, a boy and a girl. The boy was 10, the girl was 7. They watched their father hang. They watched us kill an innocent man. The kitchen was silent, only the ticking of the clock on the wall, only the distant hoot of an owl outside the window. "What happened to the person who paid for the murder?" Clara asked. "We never found out. The drifter died before he could say. But everyone suspected it was someone who wanted both men gone. Someone who wanted Burke's land and wanted Calloway to take the blame. And the family?" Elijah shook his head. "The wife took the children and left. I heard she went east, back to her people. I do not know what happened to them after that." He finally looked up, met Clara's eyes, expected to see horror there, disgust, the judgment he had passed on himself for 7 years. But instead he saw tears. Clara was crying silently, the tears rolling down her cheeks like rain on a window. "That was not your fault," she said. "I put the handcuffs on him. I helped build the gallows. I watched him die and felt glad about it. You did your job. You followed the evidence. You trusted the system. The system failed. I failed." Clara reached across the table. She took his hands in hers. Her grip was warm and strong. "You did not kill that man," she said. "A broken system did. Incomplete evidence did. The real murderer did. You were part of something tragic. But that tragedy does not define who you are." "Tell that to his children," Elijah said bitterly. "I am telling it to you," Clara replied, "because you have been punishing yourself for 7 years. And I suspect you have never once allowed yourself to believe you might deserve forgiveness." Elijah stared at her. At this woman he had known for only hours, who had invited him to dinner for no reason other than kindness, who was sitting in her kitchen holding his hands, looking at him like he was worth saving. "Why do you care?" he asked. "You do not know me." "I know enough," Clara said. "I know you have spent 7 years hiding from the world. I know you gentle horses because you understand their fear. I know you came to dinner tonight even though it terrified you." She squeezed his hands. "I know what it is like to carry guilt so heavy it feels like it will crush you. I know what it is like to believe you deserve nothing but punishment. How do you know that?" Clara released his hands. She sat back in her chair, and now it was her turn to look away. "My husband died 3 years ago," she said. "Fever took him in 2 weeks. We had been married for only a year. I am sorry." She shook her head. "That is not why I carry guilt. I carry guilt because I blamed myself. I thought maybe if I had called the doctor sooner, if I had prayed harder, if I had been a better wife, maybe he would have lived. Clara. I carried that guilt like a millstone around my neck. It nearly drowned me. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything. I wanted to die too." Her voice cracked. "But death did not want me. I kept waking up every morning, kept breathing, kept living even though I did not want to." "What changed?" Elijah asked. Clara looked at him. Her honey-colored eyes were bright with tears. "I realized that guilt was keeping me from living. It was not honoring his memory, it was destroying mine. Thomas would have hated to see me wasting away in grief. He loved life. He loved laughter. He loved me. And I was spitting on all of that by refusing to go on." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So I sold everything, came west, bought this boarding house. I decided to start feeding people, nurturing them. It felt like a way to give life instead of dwelling in death." Elijah understood then why she had invited him to dinner. She had looked at him and seen a fellow survivor, someone trapped in the amber of their own regret, frozen in a moment that would never let them go. "You saw me," he said. "I saw someone who needed to be reminded that they still existed." Clara smiled through her tears, that they still mattered. They sat in silence for a long moment. The clock ticked. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. "Can I come back?" Elijah asked. His voice was rough, hopeful, terrified. Clara's smile widened. "I was hoping you would ask. Same time next week." Same time next week. He stood. She walked him to the door. And on the porch, under the autumn stars, she reached up and touched his face. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I know that was not easy. Thank you for listening." She dropped her hand. "Good night, Elijah." It was the first time she had called him by his first name. The sound of it on her lips was like music. "Good night, Clara." He walked back to his cabin that night with something warm blooming in his chest, something he had thought was dead forever. Hope. Elijah came to dinner every week after that, then twice a week, then 3 times. By the 3rd week, Clara had stopped calling him Mr. Crane. She called him Elijah, and the sound of his name in her voice became a kind of music he had not known he was missing. They talked in the kitchen after the other guests had gone to bed. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about her mother's apple orchard, about her father's gentle hands and quiet wisdom, about the boy she had loved since she was 15, the boy who became her husband, the boy who died too young. He told her about learning to gentle horses from an old Cherokee man named Gray Eagle, who believed that every creature deserved respect, even the ones that kicked and bit. He told her about his mother dying when he was young, about his father's silence that had taught him to be silent too, about the lonely years when he had wandered from town to town, searching for a place to belong. They shared their griefs and their small joys, their fears and their tentative hopes, building something between them, brick by careful brick. The town noticed the change in Elijah. He smiled now, nodded at people on the street, even stopped to chat occasionally. The mysterious cowboy was becoming simply Elijah, Clara's Elijah, and the transformation rippled outward like circles in still water. It was on a gray November afternoon that the past came riding into Copper Springs. Elijah was at the livery stable, working with a mare that had thrown 3 riders that week. She was a beautiful animal, black as midnight, with eyes that held more fear than malice. "Easy, girl," he murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Just breathe. That is all you have to do." The mare's ears flicked toward him. Her nostrils flared. But she did not bolt. She stood trembling as Elijah moved slowly closer, his hands open and empty, his posture relaxed. "There you go," he said. "See? Nothing to be scared of. We are just going to take this nice and slow." He was so focused on the horse that he did not hear the footsteps behind him, did not sense the presence until a voice spoke. "So this is where you have been hiding." Elijah spun around. Elijah spun and felt his blood turn to ice. The man standing in the doorway was young, perhaps 20, with dark hair and darker eyes that burned with a hatred Elijah recognized, because he had felt it himself once. "Do I know you?" Elijah asked, though he was afraid he already did. The young man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You should. You killed my father." Elijah's heart stopped, then started again with a painful lurch. "You are Calloway's boy. Daniel Calloway. The boy who had been 10 years old when they hanged his father. The boy who had watched from the crowd, who had screamed and cried and had to be held back by his mother. That boy was a man now, and he had come for revenge." "I have been looking for you for 5 years," Daniel said. His hand rested on the gun at his hip. "Ever since I was old enough to ride, I tracked down every man who was part of that posse, every man who helped murder an innocent man." Elijah forced himself to breathe. The mare behind him shifted nervously, sensing the tension in the air. "What do you want?" he asked. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What do I want? I want my father back. I want my mother to stop crying herself to sleep. I want my sister to remember what it felt like to be happy. But since I cannot have any of that..." I will settle for justice." His hand tightened on the gun. "You are the last one, Crane. The others were easy to find, but you vanished. Changed your name. Hid out here in the middle of nowhere. Thought you could escape what you did." Elijah shook his head slowly. "I never tried to escape. I have spent 7 years living with what happened, punishing myself every single day. Is that supposed to make me feel sorry for you? No, I do not expect your pity. I do not deserve it." Daniel drew his gun. The barrel gleamed in the gray light. "Then draw your weapon. Let us end this like men." Elijah did not move. His gun was on his hip, but he made no move to reach for it. "No." Daniel's face twisted with rage. "Draw your gun, coward! I said no. I will not fight you." "Why not? Scared?" Elijah met the young man's eyes. "I'm not scared of dying. I have been waiting to die for 7 years. Every morning I wake up and wonder if today is the day I stop punishing myself for what happened to your father." He spread his hands. "If you want to kill me, do it. I will not stop you. But I will not fight you either. I will not draw on the son of a man I helped murder. That is not justice. That is just more killing." Daniel's hand trembled. The gun wavered. His dark eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You do not get to choose how this ends," he said. His voice cracked. "You do not get to decide." "You are right," Elijah said quietly. "I made my choice 7 years ago when I helped put handcuffs on your father, when I watched him hang and felt glad about it. I cannot undo that. I cannot bring him back. All I can do is tell you I am sorry, and mean it with every piece of my broken heart." The gun stayed raised. But Daniel did not fire. His whole body was shaking now. He begged, he said, at the trial. He begged them to believe him. He said he did not do it, and they laughed at him, called him a liar. "I know. My mother collapsed when they put the rope around his neck. She screamed his name, but nobody cared, I know. My sister had nightmares for years. She would wake up screaming for her daddy, asking why they took him away." Elijah's eyes burned. "I know. And I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry." The gun lowered. Just an inch. Then another. Daniel's face crumpled. "Why did you not believe him?" he whispered. "Why did nobody believe him?" "Because we wanted someone to blame. Because the evidence looked solid. Because we were arrogant enough to think we could not be wrong." Elijah took a step forward. "We failed your father. We failed your whole family, and nothing I say or do can ever make that right." Daniel let out a sound. Somewhere between a sob and a scream, the gun dropped to his side. "I came here to kill you," he said. "I have been planning it for 5 years, dreaming about it. And now I am here and I cannot do it." "Good," Elijah said. "Because killing me will not bring your father back. It will just destroy your life, too. And your mother will lose another person she loves." Daniel looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, the hatred in his eyes flickered, replaced by something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "You really have been punishing yourself," he said. "All these years, living out here alone every day," Elijah confirmed. "Every single day." Daniel holstered his gun, his shoulders slumped. "I do not know what to do now. I have been living for this moment for so long, and now that it is here, I just feel empty." Elijah understood that feeling, the emptiness that came when the thing you had built your life around suddenly lost its meaning. "Stay," he said. "For a few days at least. There is a boarding house in town, run by a woman named Clara Whitmore. She makes the best meals you have ever had. And she knows something about carrying guilt." Daniel stared at him. "You want me to stay? After I came here to kill you? I want you to eat a hot meal, sleep in a warm bed. Take some time to figure out what you want your life to be now. Revenge was never going to give you peace. Maybe something else will." Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "One night," he said. "That is all. That is all I am asking." Clara looked up when Elijah walked through the door of the boarding house. Her face brightened the way it always did when she saw him. like a lamp being lit, like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Then she noticed the young man behind him, and her smile faltered. "Clara," Elijah said, "this is Daniel. He needs a room for the night." "Of course." Clara recovered quickly, her hostess instincts taking over. "Come in. You must be cold. I will get you something warm to drink." She led them to the parlor. The fire was crackling. The room smelled of cinnamon and apples. Mrs. Henderson was in her usual chair by the window, knitting something in green yarn this time. Daniel stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, his eyes darting around, taking in the comfortable furniture, the warm colors, the sense of home that filled every corner. "Please sit," Clara said. "I will bring coffee." She disappeared into the kitchen. Elijah guided Daniel to a chair by the fire. "I do not belong here," Daniel said quietly. "This place is too nice, too clean. Everyone belongs here. That is the point." Clara returned with a tray, 2 cups of coffee, a plate of fresh biscuits, a small dish of honey. She set it down on the table between them. Then she looked at Daniel, really looked at him, the way she had looked at Elijah that first day in the general store. "You have had a long journey," she said. It was not a question. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You could say that," Clara nodded. "Well, supper is at 6. You are welcome to rest in your room until then. I will show you the way." She led Daniel upstairs. Elijah stayed by the fire. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He had just brought the son of the man he helped murder into the home of the woman he was falling in love with. What was he thinking? Clara came back downstairs a few minutes later. She sat in the chair Daniel had vacated. Her honey-colored eyes searched Elijah's face. "Who is he really?" she asked. Elijah told her. Everything. About Daniel appearing at the livery stable. About the gun. About the 5 years of hunting and planning revenge. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "He could have killed you," she finally said. "He could have. But he did not. No." Clara reached over and took his hand, the way she had in the kitchen that first night. Her grip was warm and strong. "You did the right thing, bringing him here. I do not know what I did. I just knew I could not let him ride away. He is so full of anger, so lost. He reminds me of myself." Clara smiled sadly. "He reminds me of myself, too, of how I was after Thomas died, so angry at the world, at God, at myself. I did not know what to do with all that rage." "What did you do with it?" "I cooked." Clara laughed softly. "I know that sounds silly, but it was the only thing that helped. Making food for other people, nurturing them, it gave me somewhere to put all that feeling." Elijah squeezed her hand. "That is not silly. That is beautiful." They sat together in silence, watching the fire, holding hands. And Elijah felt something shift inside him. Something that had been locked away for 7 years, finally beginning to open. Supper that night was quiet. Daniel sat at the table with the other guests. He ate in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate. Mrs. Henderson tried to engage him in conversation, but he gave only one-word answers. After the meal, Daniel retreated to his room. Elijah helped Clara with the dishes. They worked in their comfortable silence, washing and drying side by side. "He is so young," Clara said finally, "to carry so much pain. He was 10 when his father died, 10 years old, watching his father hang for a crime he did not commit." Clara shook her head. "I cannot imagine. I think about it every day, what it must have been like for him, for his mother, for his little sister." He set down the plate he was drying. "I deserve his hatred. I earned it. But I do not want him to destroy himself with it. I know what that kind of anger does to a person. It eats you from the inside out." Clara turned from the basin. She cupped his face in her wet hands, not caring about the soap, not caring about anything except looking into his eyes. "You are a good man, Elijah Crane. I am a man trying to be better." Same thing. She kissed him then, for the first time. A gentle press of lips that lasted only a moment. But it sent lightning through every nerve in his body. When she pulled back, she was smiling, that same smile that had changed everything. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," she said. Elijah could not speak, could barely breathe. He pulled her close and kissed her again, longer this time, deeper. 7 years of loneliness pouring out of him. 7 years of believing he did not deserve to be loved. Clara kissed him back, her hands in his hair, her body pressed against his. And in that moment, he knew. He loved her. He loved her more than he had ever loved anything. And somehow, miraculously, she loved him too. Daniel stayed for 3 days. He did not talk much, but he ate Clara's cooking. He sat by the fire with the other guests. He took long walks through town, looking at everything with eyes that seemed to be seeing the world for the first time. On the 3rd day, he came to Elijah at the livery stable. "I need to talk to you," he said. Elijah set down the brush he had been using on the black mare. She had calmed considerably over the past few days. She no longer flinched when he approached, no longer trembled when he touched her. "I am listening." Daniel paced back and forth, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "My father was not a good man," he said finally. Elijah blinked. "What?" "He was not a murderer, but he was not good either. He was mean. He hit my mother. He hit me. He had a temper that could turn on a dime." Daniel stopped pacing. He faced Elijah with eyes full of complicated emotions. "I loved him because he was my father, but I was also scared of him. We all were. My mother left him because she could not take it anymore. She took us kids and went to live with her sister." "I did not know that," Elijah said quietly. "Nobody did. My mother never talked about it. She was ashamed. And when he died, when they hanged him, she felt guilty for leaving. Like maybe if she had stayed, things would have been different." Daniel's voice cracked. "She spent years blaming herself, thinking she drove him to his death by leaving, and I was so angry. I needed someone to blame, someone besides my mother, someone besides myself for being relieved when he died." Elijah's heart clenched. "You were 10 years old, I know. But kids feel guilty too. I remember standing in that crowd, watching him hang. And part of me was horrified. But another part, a small, terrible part, was glad it was over. Glad I would never have to be scared of him again." Daniel's face crumpled. What kind of son feels that way about his own father? A son who was hurt, a son who was scared, a son who deserved better. Elijah moved closer. He put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You were a child. You did not deserve what he did to you. And you do not deserve to carry guilt for feeling relieved that the abuse was over." Daniel shook his head. "But he was innocent of the murder. He did not deserve to die. No, he did not. The system failed him. We failed him. But that does not erase what he did to you. Both things can be true at the same time." They stood in silence. The horses shifted in their stalls. The afternoon sun slanted through the stable doors. "I have spent 5 years hunting men," Daniel said, "telling myself it was about justice, about honor. But really, it was about not having to face the truth about my father, or about myself." "I understand that," Elijah said. "I spent 7 years hiding in this town, telling myself I was doing penance. But really, I was just running from the pain." Daniel looked at him. "How do you stop running?" "I do not know yet. But I think it starts with forgiving yourself. For being human, for making mistakes, for not being perfect." The young man was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "That lady." Clara. She is special. She is. She looks at you like you hung the moon. Daniel almost smiled. My mother used to look at my father like that. Before things got bad. Before he drove her away with his fists and his rage. Clara saved my life, Elijah said simply. She saw something in me worth saving. I'm still not sure what it was, but I am grateful every day. You are going to marry her. It was not a question. Elijah felt his face warm. I want to. I have not asked yet. But yes, if she will have me, she will. Daniel extended his hand. Elijah took it. And for the first time there was no hatred in the young man's eyes, only exhaustion, and something that looked like the beginning of peace. I am leaving tomorrow, Daniel said, going back east. My mother is there, and my sister. I think it is time I went home. That sounds like a good plan. Will you write to me? Let me know how things go with Clara. Elijah smiled. I will. And I am sorry for coming here to kill you. That was wrong. You had reason to be angry. Maybe. But anger is not the same as justice. And revenge is not the same as healing. Daniel turned and walked out of the stable. Elijah watched him go and felt something inside him finally begin to heal. Winter came to Copper Springs with a vengeance. Snow piled up against the buildings. Ice formed on the windows. The wind howled through the streets like a living thing. But inside Clara's boarding house, everything was warm. Elijah had moved his few possessions into a room at the boarding house by December. His cabin was too far from town in the heavy snow. That was what he told himself. The truth was simpler. He could not bear to be apart from Clara anymore. They fell into a rhythm. Mornings he worked at the livery stable or rode out to nearby ranches. Evenings he came home to Clara, to her cooking, her laughter, the light in her honey-colored eyes when she saw him walk through the door. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about their dreams and their fears, about the future they were slowly building together. Clara told him about her plans for the boarding house. She wanted to expand, add more rooms, maybe open a restaurant attached to it, a place where anyone could come for a hot meal, not just travelers passing through. I want to feed this town, she said, her eyes bright with vision. Every person who is hungry, every person who is lonely. I want them to know there is a place they can come. You will do it, Elijah said. He believed it completely. There was nothing Clara could not do when she set her mind to it. And you, she asked, what do you want? Elijah thought about it. For 7 years he had not allowed himself to want anything. Wanting was dangerous. Wanting led to hoping, and hoping led to having things taken away. But now, with Clara's hand in his, with her warmth beside him, he found that the wanting came easily. I want to build something, he said slowly, a place of my own, where I can train horses. Not just gentle them for other people, but really train them, make them the best they can be. You could do it here. Clara's eyes lit up. We could build a stable behind the boarding house. You could live here with me and have your business right outside. The words hung in the air. Live here with me. Clara, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know we have not talked about it. She spoke quickly, her cheeks flushing pink. But I care about you, more than I thought I could care about anyone again. And I do not want you to leave, ever. Elijah pulled her close. He wrapped his arms around her, held her tight against his chest. I am not going anywhere, he said, not ever again. He kissed the top of her head, breathed in the scent of her, soap and cinnamon and something that was just Clara. I love you, he said. The words came out before he could stop them, before he could think about whether it was too soon. Too much. Clara pulled back, looked up at him. Her eyes were shining with tears. Say it again. I love you, Clara Whitmore. I love you more than I have ever loved anything, more than I thought I was capable of loving. She rose up on her toes, pressed her lips to his. When she pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. I love you too, Elijah Crane. You stubborn, wounded, beautiful man. I love you too. That night they sat together by the fire, making plans, dreaming out loud about the future. They would expand the boarding house. They would build a stable. They would create a life together in this town that had become home. And maybe someday. Elijah thought but did not say. Maybe someday there would be children, little ones with Clara's honey-colored eyes and his dark hair, children who would never know loneliness, who would never doubt that they were loved. It was almost midnight when Clara yawned and stretched. I should go to bed, she said, but I do not want to leave. Then do not. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Elijah, are you asking what I think you are asking? I am asking you to marry me. The words came out steady, clear. He had not planned to say them tonight, had thought he would wait, find the perfect moment, the perfect words. But there was no perfect moment. There was only now. This woman, this feeling that filled every corner of his heart. Clara stared at him, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide. You want to marry me? I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to hold you every night. I want to build that stable and watch you feed this whole town. I want everything. With you. He took her hands. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. I know I am broken. I know I have a past that will always haunt me. But I love you, and I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you, if you will let me. Clara was crying now, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling too, that smile that had changed everything. Yes, she said. Yes, Elijah. 1,000 times, yes. He pulled her into his arms, kissed her, tasted the salt of her tears on his lips, felt her heart beating against his chest. Outside the snow fell, the wind howled, the world was cold and dark and full of sorrow. But inside Clara's boarding house, two broken people had found each other, and together they were becoming whole. The news of their engagement spread through Copper Springs like wildfire. People who had avoided Elijah for years suddenly wanted to shake his hand, congratulate him, welcome him into the community he had lived beside, but never joined. Mrs. Henderson organized an engagement party at the boarding house. She invited half the town. Elijah stood in the parlor surrounded by people who smiled at him, who spoke to him, who treated him like he belonged. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Clara stayed by his side, her hand in his, grounding him when the attention became too much, reminding him with every touch that he was not alone anymore. The party was winding down when the front door opened. A gust of cold air swept through the room, and a woman stepped inside. She was perhaps 50 years old, with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes. She stood in the doorway looking around at the decorations. The happy people, the man and woman at the center of it all. Mrs. Calloway? Elijah's voice was barely a whisper. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look. The woman walked forward, her steps slow but steady. She stopped in front of Elijah. Her eyes traveled over his face, taking in every detail. You are Elijah Crane, she said. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. My son told me about you. He told me what you said to him, how you brought him to this boarding house, how you helped him see that revenge was not the answer. Elijah could not breathe, could not speak. He just stood there, frozen. I came a long way to find you, Mrs. Calloway continued. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something that burned. I have been carrying anger toward you for 7 years, you and all the others who took my husband from me. Clara stepped closer to Elijah. Her grip on his hand tightened. But Daniel told me something else, too. She swallowed hard. He told me that you have been punishing yourself, living alone, cutting yourself off from everyone. He said you cried when you talked about my children, about what they went through. Elijah finally found his voice. I am so sorry, he said, for what happened to your husband, for what you and your children suffered. I know sorry is not enough. I know nothing will ever be enough. Mrs. Calloway was silent for a long moment. The whole room held its breath. My husband was not a saint, she said finally. He hurt us, in ways that took years to heal. But he did not deserve to die for something he did not do, and you, all of you took him from us before we ever got the chance to find out if he could change, if we could be a family again someday. Her voice broke. You took that possibility away. I know, Elijah said. His eyes were burning. His throat was tight. I know. Mrs. Calloway reached into her coat. She pulled out something small, something that glinted in the lamplight. It was a pocket watch, old and worn, the kind a man would carry his whole life. This was his, she said. I was going to give it to Daniel, but he said I should give it to you instead. He said you would understand what it means. She pressed the watch into Elijah's hand. He stared at the scratched metal, the faded numbers, the weight of a man's whole life condensed into this small object. I cannot take this, he said. You can. Mrs. Calloway's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Because this is not just a watch. It is my forgiveness, and Daniel's forgiveness, and maybe, if you can accept it, it can be the beginning of you forgiving yourself. Elijah looked at her, at this woman who had every right to hate him, who had traveled all this way not to condemn him, but to set them both free. Thank you, he whispered. It was all he could say. Mrs. Calloway nodded. Then she turned and looked around the room. At the party decorations, the engaged couple, the community gathered to celebrate. Your son told me about your engagement, she said to Clara. Congratulations. Thank you, Clara replied. Her voice was thick with emotion. Take care of him, Mrs. Calloway said, and herself. He has suffered enough. You both have. She turned and walked back toward the door. Elijah called after her. Mrs. Calloway? Wait. Will you stay? Have something to eat. Rest before you travel again. The woman paused. She looked back over her shoulder. Maybe for a little while, she said. And for the first time, she almost smiled. I hear the food here is worth the trip. Clara laughed. It was a sound full of relief and joy and hope. Come sit by the fire, she said. I will make you a plate. And just like that, the party resumed. But it was different now, deeper, more meaningful, because everyone in that room had witnessed something rare, forgiveness, real and hard-won, given not because it was deserved, but because holding on to anger was heavier than letting it go. Mrs. Calloway stayed for 3 days. She ate Clara's cooking. She talked with Mrs. Henderson about knitting. She even laughed a few times, a rusty sound like a door that had not been opened in years. On her last morning, she found Elijah in the stable. He was brushing the black mare, the one that had been so wild when he first started working with her. Now she stood calm and content, her eyes half closed with pleasure. You are good with them, Mrs. Calloway said. The horses. They deserve gentleness, Elijah replied. Most creatures do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I did not just come here to forgive you. No, I came to see what kind of man you had become, whether the guilt had made you bitter, hard, or whether it had broken you open and let something better grow. She stepped closer. And I saw that woman look at you. I saw how you look at her. I saw the way this whole town has started to warm to you. And I know what? That you are not the same man who put handcuffs on my husband 7 years ago. You have changed, grown, become someone he might even have respected. Elijah's throat tightened. I hope so. I try every day. Mrs. Calloway reached out. She put her hand on his arm. Live well, Elijah Crane. Love that woman with everything you have. Build the life my husband never got the chance to build. And when you do, think of him sometimes. Not with guilt, but with gratitude for the lesson his death taught you. I will, Elijah promised. I swear I will. She nodded. Then she turned and walked away, and Elijah watched her go with tears streaming down his face. They married in September. The small church at the edge of town had never been so full. Every pew was packed. People stood along the walls. More crowded outside the open windows, craning their necks to see. Clara wore white, a simple dress she had sewn herself. Her auburn hair was pinned up with wildflowers. She carried a bouquet of autumn roses. Elijah wore his best suit, the one he had bought special for this day. His dark hair was combed, his beard was trimmed. His hands trembled as he waited at the altar. The doors opened. Clara appeared on the arm of Dr. Wells, who had offered to walk her down the aisle since her father had passed years ago. She was beautiful. So beautiful that Elijah forgot to breathe. She walked toward him, her eyes never leaving his face, that smile on her lips, the smile that had changed everything. When she reached him, she handed her bouquet to Mrs. Henderson. Then she took his hands. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back. The preacher began to speak, the words of the ceremony washing over them, but Elijah barely heard them. He was too busy looking at Clara, memorizing her face, marveling that she had chosen him. "Do you take this woman?" the preacher asked. "I do," Elijah said, his voice strong and sure. "Do you take this man?" "I do," Clara said, her voice trembling with joy. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Elijah pulled her close. He kissed her softly, then more deeply. The church erupted in cheers and applause. They walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, husband and wife. And Elijah knew that he had never been happier in his entire life. The reception was held at the boarding house. Clara had cooked for 2 days. Mrs. Henderson had baked the cake. The whole town had contributed something. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, children running underfoot, elders watching with misty eyes. Elijah danced with his wife, held her close as they swayed to the fiddle music. Her head rested on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I love you too," she replied. "Thank you for inviting me to dinner that day." Nobody had ever done that before. Then everyone else was foolish. Clara lifted her head, looked into his eyes. "Because you were the best dinner guest I ever had." He laughed, a sound that had once felt foreign to him, but now came easily, naturally, like breathing. Outside the windows, the autumn sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the same sky Elijah had stared at for 7 lonely years. But he was not lonely anymore. He had Clara. He had friends. He had a home. He had a future. And it had all started with one simple dinner invitation. On their wedding night, Clara led him upstairs to the room they would share. Moonlight streamed through the window, silver and soft. It painted patterns on the floor and on her face. "You saved me," she said. "You know that, do you not?" "I think we saved each other," he replied. She smiled, that same smile that had first cracked the ice around his heart in the general store a year ago. "I looked at you that day, and I saw someone worth knowing, someone worth loving. I am so glad I trusted that feeling." "I am so glad you invited me to dinner," Elijah said. No one had ever done that before. "Then everyone else was foolish," Clara replied. "Because you were the best dinner guest I ever had." He laughed, gathered her in his arms, held her close, feeling her heartbeat against his own, feeling the brightness of her presence like sunshine after a long winter. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other, wrapped in the future they would build together. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead. the same stars Elijah had spent so many years talking to in his loneliness. But now, he had someone who answered back. Someone who listened. Someone who looked at him and saw not the sum of his mistakes, but the whole of his potential. The next morning, Elijah woke to sunlight, and Clara beside him. Her auburn hair spread across the pillow, her face soft with sleep. He watched her breathe, in and out, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She opened her eyes, smiled when she saw him looking at her. "Good morning, husband. Good morning, wife." She reached up, touched his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered cheek. "What are you thinking about? About how I spent 7 years believing I deserved solitude, believing I could never be loved, believing I had to pay for my mistakes forever. And now? Now I know that forgiveness is possible, that love is possible, that one simple act of kindness can change everything." Clara pulled him down, kissed him softly. "One dinner invitation," she said against his lips. "One dinner invitation," he agreed. They would build their stable. They would expand this boarding house. They would fill it with guests and laughter and children someday. They would carry their scars forever, but they would carry them together. Because in the end, all it took was one invitation, one dinner, one woman brave enough to see beyond his silence and into his soul. And a lonely cowboy finally found his way home. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.